The human mechanic had always lived a quiet life. His home was a small, worn-down workshop at the edge of a busy spaceport, a place filled with the constant hum of engines and the smell of grease. He spent his days repairing old ships that no one else wanted, machines that others considered useless. He didn't have much money, but he had skill, patience, and an unusual love for broken things. Every scratch, every dent, every burned-out circuit told a story. And he could see potential where others only saw junk. One day, a rare opportunity came into his life. A galactic prince, known for his arrogance and extravagance, was auctioning off some of his old possessions. Among them was a starship, a vessel the prince called scrap and useless. The crowd at the auction laughed at the idea that a human mechanic would even consider buying it. It was a large ship covered in dents and scratches, with panels that looked like they had seen countless battles. The prince barely even looked at the human as he announced the starting bid. The mechanic didn't care about the laughter. He had a feeling, a small spark in his chest that told him there was more to the ship than anyone realized. He studied the metal, tapped on the hull, listened to the faint vibrations of the engines, and even smelled the faint ozone that leaked from its core. Something about the ship spoke to him in a way that no human-made machine ever had. It felt alive, though he didn't yet understand why. He spent every credit he had, stretching himself to the limit, and won the auction. The crowd gasped in disbelief. A human bought that? That thing is beyond repair. Someone shouted. Others shook their heads, muttering that he would regret it. Even the prince raised an eyebrow, as if he couldn't believe that anyone could be foolish enough to pay good money for his so-called scrap. But the mechanic didn't care. He had made his choice, and his heart told him it was right. Dragging the ship back to his workshop was no small task. He had to maneuver it through crowded hangars, dodge transport ships, and deal with the curious glances of every passerby. By the time he finally reached his workshop, he was exhausted, but the thrill of ownership filled him with energy. The ship rested in the center of his small hangar, its massive hull looming like a sleeping giant. The mechanic circled it, inspecting every panel, every bolt, every wire. He could see the layers of history embedded in the ship. It had clearly traveled through dangerous zones, fought off unknown threats, and survived. And now it was in his hands. As he began to work on it, strange things started to happen. The first night he stayed in the workshop, he noticed unusual patterns in the ship's hull. There were scars that seemed to shift slightly, as if the metal itself was breathing. Tools he held near the engine core sometimes sparked for no reason. Lights flickered, not in a simple electrical problem, but in a way that almost seemed responsive, as if the ship were aware of him. The mechanic rubbed his eyes, thinking he was imagining things. He had dealt with complex engines before, but this was different. He spent the next few days carefully studying the ship. He cleaned the panels, tightened loose bolts, and ran diagnostics on the engines. Every test showed the ship as inactive or non-functional, but the strange behaviors continued. Sometimes, when he spoke softly, the lights on the control panels would brighten. Sometimes, when he placed his hand on the hull, a low hum resonated from deep inside the ship. It was subtle at first, but gradually it became undeniable. The ship wasn't just a machine. It was something more. Despite the odd signs, the mechanic pressed on. He didn't have the luxury to waste time worrying about what he didn't understand. He had a dream: to restore the ship, to bring it back to life, and perhaps even to fly it one day. He worked day and night, sleeping only a few hours, repairing engines, rewiring circuits, and patching the hull. His hands were covered in grease, his clothes torn, but his determination never wavered. Every time he fixed a section, he felt a small sense of connection with the ship as if it were responding to his care. One evening, while inspecting the engine core, he noticed a small panel he hadn't seen before. It was covered in alien symbols, unfamiliar but intriguing. Curiosity got the better of him, and he carefully pressed a sequence of buttons, trying to see if the panel could be opened. Suddenly, the engine core pulsed with a bright blue light, and the entire ship seemed to vibrate. Panels shifted slightly, and the low hum grew louder, almost like a growl. The mechanic jumped back in shock. He had triggered something, though he didn't know what. For the first time, fear entered his mind. He had always been brave when dealing with machines, but this was different. The ship was responding in ways no machine should. Its movements were smooth, deliberate, and almost intelligent. He realized that the vessel he had bought for scrap was not just old or damaged. It was alive in some way he couldn't yet comprehend. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. He had stumbled upon something rare, something no human mechanic had ever owned before. Sleep became impossible. The mechanic stayed by the ship's side, taking notes, observing its behavior, and trying to understand its patterns. He noticed that the ship reacted differently, depending on how he approached it. When he spoke softly, the hum seemed calmer. When he worked carefully and gently, the panels shifted less aggressively. The more he cared for it, the more the ship responded positively. It was as if it were testing him, learning about him, and deciding whether he was trustworthy. News of the purchase spread slowly through the spaceport. Other mechanics and traders whispered about the human who had bought the Galactic Prince's scrap ship. Some called him foolish, others curious, but no one dared approach the vessel. There was something about it that made even the bravest aliens uneasy. Rumors began to circulate that the ship was not ordinary, that it had survived battles no one had lived to tell about. But the human mechanic didn't care about rumors. He cared about understanding, about connecting, and about seeing the ship for what it could be. Then one night, as he studied the engine core, he noticed the hum had changed. It was no longer random or mechanical. It had a rhythm, like a heartbeat. The lights on the control panel flickered in response to his breathing. The ship seemed to be alive in a way that defied all logic, and the mechanic realized something incredible. He wasn't just repairing the ship. He was waking it up. It had chosen him. And in that moment, a bond began to form, a connection that would change both their lives forever. He didn't know what the ship would do next. He didn't know if it would remain calm or turn violent. But he felt ready. He had spent years working with machines, learning patience, understanding, and trust. And now, all that experience was about to be tested in ways he could never have imagined. The human mechanic had bought a ship that everyone else dismissed, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to realize that he hadn't just bought a machine. He had brought a living legend into his workshop, a being with its own will, its own instincts, and perhaps even a soul. By the end of that first part of his journey, the human mechanic knew one thing for certain. His life was about to change forever. He had taken a risk that everyone else thought foolish, and now, standing in the dim glow of the engine core, he understood that sometimes the greatest discoveries come from seeing potential where no one else does, and from believing in something others have long forgotten. The adventure was only beginning, and the human mechanic was ready to face whatever came next, side by side with the living, breathing ship he had somehow awakened. The human mechanic had barely slept since he first noticed the ship's strange reactions. Every creak of metal, every flicker of light, every pulse from the engine core kept him awake. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Something about the ship felt alive, and the more he studied it, the more he realized that it wasn't just responding, it was watching him. During the day, he tried to repair the ship as he normally would, tightening panels, checking circuits, and cleaning rusted machinery. But nothing behaved like a normal machine. Wires seemed to hum with energy when he touched them, and small sparks appeared and disappeared almost as if the ship was breathing. At first, the mechanic was careful. He had repaired strange machines before, but this was unlike anything he had ever handled. It was as if the ship had a mind of its own. One afternoon, while examining the engine compartment, he noticed something unusual. A section of the hull, near the back, was slightly raised, like a muscle tensing beneath metal skin. He reached out to touch it, and the hull shivered under his hand. The mechanic stepped back in surprise. He had never experienced anything like it. Every machine he had ever repaired had a limit, a predictable response, but this ship seemed to react emotionally, almost as if it had feelings. He decided to spend the night inside the workshop, watching the ship, trying to understand it. The hangar was dark, except for the soft glow from the ship's core. As he sat in a chair nearby, he noticed a pattern. Whenever he spoke calmly, the lights on the ship dimmed slightly, and the low hum softened. When he moved too quickly or touched a panel roughly, the lights flickered violently, and the ship seemed to grow tense. The mechanic realized that the ship was testing him, measuring his patience, his calmness, his understanding. Curiosity got the better of him, and he began experimenting. He would speak in whispers, gently tapping on panels, watching the lights and feeling the vibrations. Sometimes it responded with a soft pulse, almost like a heartbeat. At other times, a section of the hull would shift as if acknowledging him. For hours, he sat quietly, observing, trying not to startle it. The connection grew stronger, and a strange sense of companionship began to form. But not everything was peaceful. One night, as he examined the navigation console, a loud grinding noise erupted from the engine. Sparks flew from a nearby panel, and the ship's lights flashed erratically. The mechanic jumped back, heart pounding. The ship wasn't angry. It was anxious, almost as if it were waking from a long, uneasy sleep. He cautiously approached it again, hands steady, speaking softly. Slowly, the lights dimmed, and the hum returned to a calm rhythm. He realized that the ship was sensitive to emotion, not just action. Over the next few days, he learned more about the ship's strange behaviors. When he approached it with patience, the panels seemed to open slightly, allowing him access to sections that were previously inaccessible. Tools would sometimes glide gently along circuits, as if guided by the ship itself. It was not just a vessel. It was learning, adapting, and possibly communicating in ways he could barely understand. The mechanic began keeping a journal, documenting everything. The way lights pulsed, the timing of the hum, the shifts in the hull. He drew diagrams, wrote down sequences of sparks, and noted the areas that responded to his touch. At first, it felt like an experiment, but slowly it became clear that he was forming a bond with something living, something beyond comprehension. It was a strange mixture of awe, fear, and excitement. He had never felt such a connection with any machine, and yet he could not explain it. One evening, a soft wind blew through the open hangar doors, carrying the distant sounds of the spaceport. He was cleaning the outer hull when he noticed movement in the shadows. For a moment, he thought someone had entered the workshop, but there was no one. Then he realized it was the ship itself, shifting subtly, as if it were moving in its sleep. A panel near the back opened slightly, revealing glowing lines beneath the surface. The mechanic leaned closer. For the first time, he felt a spark of understanding. The ship was alive, and it was aware of him. Excitement mixed with fear. He had always been brave with machines, but this was different. He was not just repairing it. He was interacting with a conscious being. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him. If he made a mistake, he could harm it. If he acted carelessly, he could destroy the bond they were forming. But the more he learned, the more he realized that the ship was willing to trust him. Even in its strange and cautious way, the bond grew stronger when he tried to communicate. He would speak quietly, narrating his actions as he repaired or cleaned. "I'm tightening this bolt," he would say, or "I'm checking this panel for damage." At first, nothing happened, but over time, subtle changes occurred. A section of the hull would shift slightly, a panel would glow brighter, or a small vibration would pass through the floor. He realized that the ship was responding to his words. It recognized him. Curiosity turned into exploration. He began opening hidden compartments, inspecting long-forgotten control panels, and mapping the ship from top to bottom. Every discovery was met with subtle reactions, the hum changing pitch, the lights flickering in response, the hull shifting almost imperceptibly. He could feel it watching him, understanding him, and slowly learning that he was not a threat. Despite the fascination, he could not ignore the danger. The ship was powerful. Its engines were massive, capable of speeds that could outrun most vessels in the galaxy. Its structure was resilient, able to survive extreme conditions. The mechanic realized that if it ever turned aggressive, he would have no chance of controlling it. Fear kept him cautious, but it also made him respect the ship even more. He understood that this was not a machine to dominate, it was a being to partner with. One night, as he rested near the engine core, he noticed something remarkable. The ship's hum had synchronized with his breathing. Each pulse of light seemed to match his heartbeat. He sat quietly, letting the sensation wash over him. For the first time, he felt a deep connection, a silent communication that transcended words. It was as if the ship recognized him as its companion, not just its mechanic. The thought sent chills down his spine. He was no longer just a human who bought a scrap ship. He was now part of something extraordinary. Word began to spread among the few people who knew him. Other mechanics whispered about the human and his living ship. Traders spoke in hushed tones about strange lights and sounds coming from the workshop. Some feared the vessel, others envied him, but the mechanic ignored it all. He had found something rare, something that had chosen him, and no outside opinion could change that. As the nights passed, the ship continued to display strange behaviors. Sometimes it would emit low growls when sensing movement outside the workshop. Sometimes panels would shift in patterns that seemed deliberate, almost like gestures. The mechanic began to understand that it was protective, not just reactive. It was learning its own abilities and deciding when and how to respond. The human mechanic also learned patience. He realized that rushing repairs or forcing the ship to act would result in resistance. Gentle movements, careful observation, and quiet speech produced cooperation. The relationship was mutual. He respected the ship, and the ship, in turn, trusted him. Together, they formed a rhythm, a partnership that was slowly growing stronger by the day. Then came the moment that changed everything. While examining a particularly old section of the hull, he accidentally triggered a hidden mechanism. A panel slid open to reveal an intricate array of controls he had never seen. Lights flashed, the hum intensified, and for a brief moment, the ship seemed to stretch, almost like waking from a long slumber. The mechanic froze. He realized that this was more than a discovery. It was an awakening. He had touched something, ancient and powerful, and the ship was now fully aware of him in a way it had not been before. From that night onward, the bond became undeniable. The ship no longer just responded to him, it anticipated his actions. When he approached with a tool, the mechanism would adjust itself slightly to make the task easier. When he spoke, the lights and hum would react in a pattern that almost resembled acknowledgement. The mechanic began to feel a strange pride. He had taken a ship no one else wanted, a vessel considered scrap, And he was now building something extraordinary, Dot. He realized the full scope of what he had. A living, sentient ship, capable of immense power, and willing to trust him. The weight of that responsibility was immense, but so was the excitement. He was no longer just a human mechanic. He was the companion of something legendary, a being that had survived the galaxy's worst battles, and now looked to him for guidance, care, and understanding. Dot, by the end of this part of his journey, the mechanic knew one thing: the adventure was only beginning. He had uncovered a secret that few humans had ever touched. The ship was alive, aware, and now bonded with him. The road ahead would be full of challenges, discoveries, and perhaps danger, but he was ready. Side by side with the ship, he would face whatever came next, and together they would explore the stars in a way no one could have imagined. The human mechanic had grown accustomed to the strange behavior of the ship, but even he couldn't have predicted what would happen next. For days, he had been cautiously exploring every corner of the vessel, trying to understand its systems and strange responses. Every panel he opened, every wire he touched seemed to pulse with a hidden energy, and the low hum of the engine had become a constant companion. But one night, something extraordinary occurred, something that would change the mechanic's understanding of the ship forever. Dot, it began when he was examining the navigation system. The ship's core glowed faintly, and the hum resonated through the workshop in a way that felt almost alive. He had noticed before that the ship reacted to his voice and movements, but this time it seemed different. The lights on the control panels flickered in a steady rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, and a soft vibration passed through the floor. It was as if the ship were trying to communicate. The mechanic leaned closer, unsure what to expect. He had spent nights talking to the vessel, narrating his actions and speaking gently, and it had responded with subtle movements. But now, the response was more deliberate, more intelligent. The panel before him shifted slightly, revealing hidden symbols that glowed softly. They were alien in design, intricate and flowing, but the mechanic felt a strange familiarity, as if the patterns were meant for him to understand. He reached out to touch the glowing symbols, and immediately the ship reacted. The hum grew louder, the vibration intensified, and the lights danced across the panels. It was not aggressive, but powerful, almost like the ship had recognized him fully for the first time. The mechanic froze, heart racing. He realized that the vessel was not only alive, but it was aware of him as a companion, not just a repairer. It was acknowledging his presence in a way that no machine ever had. Over the next few hours, he experimented carefully. He touched panels, pressed buttons, and spoke softly, watching the ship's reactions. Each movement seemed to create a response, lights pulsing, hull shifting, the hum changing pitch. The vessel was communicating, but not in words. It was subtle, intuitive, and deeply intelligent. The mechanic could feel it watching him, understanding him, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, learning from him. He realized that he had unlocked something extraordinary. This was no ordinary ship. It was a semi-sentient vessel, a living being capable of thought and instinct. Every adjustment he made was met with feedback, every gentle touch respected. The bond they were forming was growing stronger, and for the first time, he understood that he was not merely repairing a ship. He was partnering with it. Dot, as the nights passed, the ship began to show signs of movement beyond the workshop. Panels would shift slightly when no one was near them. The hum would rise and fall in patterns that seemed deliberate. He began to notice that the ship was aware of the outside world, reacting to noises and vibrations from the spaceport. It was as if it could sense danger, curiosity, and presence without seeing them directly. The mechanic spent every moment he could with the ship. He mapped every control, noted every reaction, and carefully tested its limits. The more time he spent, the more he realized the depth of its intelligence. It was protective, observant, and adaptive. Sometimes it would emit low vibrations when he approached quickly, almost like a warning. Sometimes it would shift panels to guide him, making his work easier. The vessel was alive in every sense of the word, and it had chosen him as its partner. One evening, as he was adjusting the engine core, a sudden surge of energy ran through the ship. The lights flashed violently, and a low, deep growl reverberated through the hangar. The mechanic stepped back in shock. He had accidentally triggered a hidden system, something that had been dormant for who knows how long. The ship's hull shifted in a way that seemed almost animalistic, bristling as if preparing for action. The mechanic felt fear, but also exhilaration. He was not in control, not entirely, but he had awakened something remarkable. For hours, he sat and observed. The ship's responses were no longer subtle. It moved deliberately, adjusting panels, glowing lines forming intricate patterns, and vibrations passing through the floor like a living pulse. The mechanic realized that he was witnessing the full intelligence of a legendary vessel. He was not just a mechanic. He was the first human to partner with such a being. The realization filled him with pride, awe, and a touch of fear. The bond between them deepened further. The mechanic learned to anticipate the ship's reactions. If he moved carefully, it remained calm. If he spoke gently, it responded with soft vibrations. If he made a sudden move, the ship would tense. It was no longer merely reactive. It was intelligent, responsive, and aware. He could feel a rhythm emerging, a silent understanding between human and vessel, one that transcended words. The ship also began to reveal hidden features. Compartments opened that he had never noticed. Panels slid to reveal control mechanisms that seemed alien but functional. Engines purred with an energy he had never seen before. It was as if the ship had been waiting for the right companion to awaken it, and now it was showing him its true capabilities. The mechanic felt a thrill unlike any he had ever known. He was discovering a legend, a living ship, and it was responding to him as if it were glad to see him. Despite the excitement, he remained cautious. He knew the vessel's power was immense. Its engines could outrun most ships. Its hull could withstand attacks, and its systems were beyond human understanding. One wrong move, one careless action, and he could lose everything. But fear was balanced with fascination. He respected the ship, and it in turn seemed to trust him. Together, they were learning how to communicate, how to work in harmony, and how to understand each other. As he grew more familiar with its intelligence, he began experimenting with small commands. He would gesture toward a control panel, and the ship would adjust itself. He would speak softly, and lights would respond. He realized that it had learned to understand his intentions, almost like it could read his mind in a way. Each success filled him with amazement, and the connection between them became stronger. He was no longer a mechanic fixing a broken machine. He was a companion to a living legend. Word slowly spread among the few who knew him. Rumors began to circulate about the human who had tamed a living ship. Traders and mechanics whispered in awe and disbelief. Some thought he had gone mad. Others were fascinated, wondering how a simple human could partner with something so powerful. The mechanic didn't care. He was focused on understanding the ship, on learning its rhythms, and on strengthening their bond. Everything else was secondary. One night, as he rested near the engine core, he felt the ship's hum deepen, almost like a conversation. It was no longer subtle. It was deliberate. Vibrations pulsed through the floor in patterns that seemed to match his heartbeat. Lights flickered in sequences that almost resembled signals. The mechanic leaned back, feeling a strange warmth of companionship. He realized that the ship recognized him as more than just a caretaker. It recognized him as a partner, a companion, someone it could rely on. The realization was overwhelming. He had taken a ship everyone else considered scrap and discovered a sentient, semi-living being capable of intelligence, adaptation, and instinct. The vessel had chosen him, and he had chosen it in return. Together, they were no longer just human and machine. They were a team united by curiosity, trust, and an extraordinary bond. By the end of this third part of his journey, the mechanic knew that the ship was more than a machine, more than a vessel. It was a living entity, capable of thought, observation, and interaction. He had awakened it from dormancy and formed a connection that few humans had ever experienced. The road ahead promised challenges, discoveries, and perhaps danger, but he felt ready. He was no longer just a mechanic fixing a broken ship. He was a partner, a companion, and together they were about to explore a world far bigger and more complex than either of them had ever imagined. The adventure had truly begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The human mechanic had spent weeks learning the rhythms of the ship, understanding its subtle responses, and forming a quiet bond. But what he didn't realize was that the ship was not just observing him, it was learning to protect itself, and him. Its instincts were slowly awakening, revealing something he had not yet understood. This was no ordinary vessel. It was powerful, intelligent, and in some ways, alive. It started one evening when a group of scavengers from the spaceport wandered too close to the workshop. They were curious, loud, and careless, peering through the hangar doors and trying to get a look at the human's mysterious purchase. The mechanic was fixing a panel near the engine core and didn't notice them at first. Then a soft vibration ran through the floor, and the lights on the ship flickered with an almost urgent rhythm. He paused, sensing that something was wrong. The ship reacted before he even understood it. Panels slid into place, creating barriers in the workshop, and the hum from the core deepened, resonating through the walls like a warning growl. The scavengers stepped back, startled, as the lights shifted and the floor vibrated under their feet. They froze, unsure what was happening. The mechanic watched in awe. The ship was not just alive, it was protective. It sensed danger and responded. Instinctively, the scavengers, thinking it was some kind of malfunction, waved off their fear and stepped closer. That was when the ship acted more deliberately. A panel opened along the hull, and a low, guttural vibration sounded from the engine. Like a warning roar, the workshop lights pulsed violently, reflecting off the metal walls. The scavengers stumbled back, suddenly realizing this was no ordinary machine. The mechanic stepped forward, hands raised, but he didn't need to command it. The ship was defending him on its own. After the scavengers ran off, the mechanic took a deep breath and examined the ship. Its hull had shifted slightly, panels now arranged as if forming a protective shell around him. He realized that the vessel had instincts, wolf-like instincts, alert and ready. It had assessed the threat and taken action without waiting for him. He felt a mixture of amazement and respect. He had thought he was learning the ship, but it was also teaching him about its own power, about how it could survive and protect those it trusted. Over the next few days, the mechanic observed the ship's behavior more closely. Every time someone came near the workshop, even unintentionally, the ship reacted. It wasn't violent, but it was alert. Panels shifted, lights flickered, and low hums vibrated through the walls. The ship could sense presence, movement, and intent. It was not just a machine. It was intelligent, calculating, and protective. The mechanic began to see it as a partner in every sense of the word. The ship also began responding to his commands in more advanced ways. If he gestured toward a control panel, the panel would adjust itself. If he indicated a repair, the tools would align perfectly, almost as if the ship were assisting him. It was no longer passive. It was actively participating in the work, learning from him, and sometimes even anticipating his next move. The mechanic realized that this bond was mutual. He cared for the ship, and the ship, in its own way, was protecting and assisting him. One night, he decided to test the ship's reactions to a more controlled threat. He set up some old equipment near the hangar doors and intentionally moved it to create noise. Immediately, the ship's lights flickered, and a low vibration ran through the floor. Panels shifted to block the doorways, and the engine core emitted a warning hum. The mechanic watched carefully, amazed. The ship was responding instinctively, protecting its space, and by extension, him. The more he observed, the more he understood that this was no ordinary vessel. It was a predator in its own right, a wolf ship, he thought. It had instincts, intelligence, and strength. It could defend itself, defend him, and likely survive in situations that would destroy ordinary machines. It had a life of its own, and it was learning to navigate threats as they appeared. The mechanic felt a deep respect for it. He had bought what others called scrap, but he had discovered a living legend. The ship's responses weren't limited to threats. It began showing signs of awareness in everyday actions. When he worked on certain panels, the lights on the ship would adjust to illuminate the area perfectly. When he spoke softly, the hum softened in response. When he made mistakes, the panels would shift slightly, as if correcting him. It was learning from him, understanding him, and helping him in return. The mechanic had formed a partnership with something extraordinary, something alive. The mechanic also noticed how the ship reacted to emotions. When he was frustrated or impatient, the lights flickered sharply, and the hum became tense. When he was calm and careful, the response was smooth and steady. The ship was not only aware of physical threats, but emotional states as well. He realized that it could sense his mood, his intentions, and perhaps even his character. This understanding deepened their bond. The human mechanic and the wolf ship were learning to trust each other. Rumors about the ship continued to spread. Other humans, and even some aliens, whispered about the strange vessel that reacted like a living creature. Some were skeptical, others fascinated, but no one dared approach the workshop. The ship's reputation began to grow, not as a machine, but as something alive, something legendary. Yet the mechanic ignored the outside world. His focus was on learning, understanding, and strengthening his bond with the ship. As days turned into nights, the ship's wolf-like instincts became more pronounced. It would shift panels to block areas it deemed vulnerable. It would emit warning vibrations when it sensed movement outside the hangar. It would respond to the mechanic's calm gestures with subtle adjustments, making repairs easier and more precise. Every action demonstrated awareness, intelligence, and instinct. The mechanic marveled at how alive it had become. One evening, as he worked on the engine core, a sudden noise from outside startled him. Without hesitation, the ship reacted. Panels moved to block the entrances, lights flashed in warning patterns, and the hum deepened to a protective growl. The mechanic realized that the wolf ship had taken full control of its instincts, prioritizing his safety above all else. He felt a mixture of pride and awe. This was no longer just a machine he had bought. It was his partner, his protector, and something far greater than he had ever imagined. The bond between human and ship grew stronger. They had learned to anticipate each other. The mechanic could sense when the ship would react, and the ship could respond to his intentions. It was a silent conversation, an unspoken understanding that went beyond words. The mechanic realized that he had not only awakened the ship, but had become part of its life, and it had become part of his by the end of this part of his journey. The mechanic knew one thing. He was no longer just a human working on a machine. He was a partner, a companion, and a caretaker of something alive, intelligent, and powerful. The Wolf ship had shown its instincts, its intelligence, and its loyalty. The adventure that began with a simple purchase of scrap had evolved into a partnership that would challenge everything he knew about life, machines, and trust. The human mechanic was ready. Together, he and the Wolf ship would face the challenges ahead, explore the universe, and perhaps change the way humans and ships interacted forever. Their story was just beginning, and the bond they shared was strong, unbreakable, and extraordinary. The human mechanic had grown comfortable with the Wolf ship. He knew its moods, its rhythms, and its instincts. He had learned to communicate with it in ways that went beyond words. But he had no idea that their growing bond had not gone unnoticed. Far across the galaxy, the Galactic Prince, who had sold the ship for what he thought was a trivial sum, had begun to realize his mistake. The prince had been careless. He had dismissed the ship as worthless scrap, something no human or alien could ever make useful. But word traveled slowly through the galaxy, and whispers reached him. The human who had bought the ship was not just repairing it, he was awakening. The ship was alive, intelligent, and powerful. The prince's advisors warned him that what he had sold for a few credits was a vessel capable of immense danger. The prince, furious at his own carelessness, decided to reclaim it. Within days, a fleet of bounty hunters and mercenaries were dispatched. They arrived at the spaceport, scanning for the human and the legendary ship. The human mechanic, however, was unaware of the danger approaching. He was busy working inside the workshop, carefully inspecting the engine core and noting every subtle response of the ship. The Wolf ship, sensing something unusual in the vibrations outside, began to react. Panels shifted, lights flickered, and a low, warning hum vibrated through the hangar dot. At first, the mechanic thought it was the usual sensitivity to movement, but the vibrations grew stronger, sharper, and more deliberate. He stepped out of the control area and looked around. Shadows moved outside the hangar door ships, descending from above, small crafts maneuvering around the port. The Wolf ship reacted instantly. Panels slid into defensive positions, blocking entrances and creating a shielded space around the mechanic. The lights flickered violently, and the hum grew into a low growl, deep and warning. The human realized immediately that this was no ordinary encounter. The ship had recognized a threat and was preparing to protect him. He felt a surge of admiration and fear. He had always known the vessel was alive, intelligent, and powerful, but he had never seen it react so decisively. The Wolf ship was not just protecting its space, it was defending him. The bounty hunters approached cautiously, scanning the hangar, unsure of what they would face. Their sensors picked up the movement of panels and the unusual energy signatures from the ship, but they could not fully understand it. They assumed it was a defensive system, a sophisticated AI perhaps, but they were about to learn that this was something far beyond artificial intelligence. Suddenly, the ship reacted. A panel opened along the hull, revealing what looked like a weapon system, though it was unlike anything the humans or aliens had ever seen. It was not aggressive at first. It was a warning. The vibrations from the engine core intensified. Lights flashed in patterns designed to disorient and intimidate. The bounty hunters faltered. The human watched in awe. The ship was assessing the situation, calculating responses, and asserting its presence without harming anyone yet. The mechanic realized he needed to guide the ship carefully. He spoke softly, narrating his actions as he had learned to do. "Calm down," he whispered. "We're not attacking. Just let them know we're ready." The ship responded almost immediately. The lights stabilized, the vibrations softened, but the panels remained in defensive positions. It was a delicate balance, showing strength without aggression, protecting its companion without starting a battle dot. As the bounty hunters moved closer, one of them attempted to enter the hangar. The wolf ship reacted instantly. Panels shifted, blocking the doorway, and a loud, low vibration pulsed through the floor. The intruder stumbled back, alarmed by the sheer power of the response. The mechanic remained calm, understanding that the ship's instincts were tuned to protect him. He realized that he had awakened a creature capable of defending both itself and him against overwhelming odds. The standoff continued for hours. The human mechanic and the wolf ship remained inside the workshop, the ship adjusting its defenses, as needed, reacting to every movement outside. The bounty hunters tried various strategies, flashing lights, loud noises, even minor attempts at force, but the ship countered every move with subtle, precise responses. It was as if it could anticipate their intentions before they acted. The mechanic watched in awe, realizing that the bond between them had made the ship smarter, more responsive, and nearly impossible to challenge. Meanwhile, the Galactic Prince, monitoring the operation from afar, grew frustrated. He had sent what he believed were elite forces, and yet nothing was working. His advisors warned him to retreat, but his pride would not allow it. He underestimated the human and the ship, assuming that a mere mechanic could not control something so powerful. He had been wrong. The ship was not just a machine. It was alive, intelligent, and loyal to its companion. The mechanic knew that confrontation was inevitable. The wolf ship had instincts, but it also had limits. He needed to find a way to avoid bloodshed while protecting himself and the vessel. He decided to try a direct approach. Carefully, he stepped toward the control panels and began signaling to the intruders with a simple pattern of lights and vibrations. It was a peaceful gesture, but one that demonstrated control and awareness. The ship responded immediately, adjusting its panels to reinforce the message dot. To his surprise, the bounty hunters paused. They had never encountered a ship that seemed alive, that responded intelligently to human gestures, that could assert dominance without violence. Slowly, they began to retreat, unsure of what to do. The mechanic realized that the wolf ship had not only defended him, but had sent a message. This was not a machine to be reckoned with casually. The next day, the human mechanic assessed the situation carefully. He realized that the Galactic Prince would not give up easily. The wolf ship's instincts were sharp, but the human needed to plan. They could not stay in the spaceport forever. He began preparing the ship for flight, carefully checking every system, every panel, every response mechanism. The wolf ship assisted in its own way, shifting panels, adjusting engines, and aligning systems in anticipation. Together, they were ready. As they prepared, the mechanic reflected on the journey so far. He had bought what everyone else called scrap. He had spent weeks learning its rhythms, understanding its instincts, and forming a bond that transcended ordinary human and machine interaction. Now that bond was about to be tested against forces far stronger and more dangerous than he had ever faced. The adventure that had begun as curiosity and fascination had grown into a struggle for survival and trust. When the final preparations were complete, the mechanic activated the core. The ship responded immediately, lights pulsing, panels shifting, hums resonating like a heartbeat. The wolf ship was ready, aware, and protective. Together, they would leave the spaceport, evade the prince's forces, and begin a journey that neither had ever imagined. The mechanic felt a thrill, unlike any he had ever known. He was not just flying a vessel, he was partnering with a living legend. As the engines roared to life, the panels shifted into optimal flight configuration, and the hangar doors opened. The wolf ship moved with precision, lifting off smoothly, instinct and intelligence guiding every maneuver. The mechanic watched in awe as the city below grew smaller, the stars beyond expanding into a limitless sky. They were free, at least for now, but the danger had only begun. The Galactic Prince would not give up, and neither would anyone who had heard of the human who had awakened a wolf ship. By the end of this part of the story, the mechanic understood something profound. He had discovered something extraordinary, something alive, intelligent, and loyal. He had faced the first real threat and survived, not because of strength alone, but because of trust, understanding, and the bond he shared with the ship. Together, they had proven that courage, patience, and connection could overcome even the most overwhelming odds. The adventure was far from over, but the human mechanic felt ready. The wolf ship had instincts, intelligence, and loyalty, and together they would face the challenges ahead. Every move, every decision, every response would be guided by the unique partnership they had forged. This was no longer just a story of a human and a ship. It was a story of trust, courage, and the extraordinary bond between a living legend and the human who had believed in it. The human mechanic and the wolf ship had traveled far from the spaceport, navigating the endless stretches of stars and uncharted systems. The Galactic Prince's forces were still out there, no doubt following, but for now, they were safe. The mechanic could finally take a moment to observe the ship and reflect on everything that had happened. It was more than just a vessel. It was alive, intelligent, and loyal. It had instincts, courage, and a fierce protective nature that had saved him countless times. The bond between them had grown deeper than words could express. Every hum of the engine, every flicker of lights, every shift in the hull was a form of communication. The mechanic could feel its mood, understand its intentions, and even sense when it was cautious or curious. The ship had become his companion, a partner, and a guardian. He realized that this connection was unlike anything he had ever experienced, with a machine or a living being. But safety was temporary. The mechanic knew the prince would not give up so easily. His forces were relentless, skilled, and numerous. If they caught up, the ship and its human companion would face a challenge unlike any before. The mechanic took a deep breath, preparing himself for what he knew was coming. He had trained, observed, and built a bond strong enough to face almost anything, but he also knew they would need every bit of trust and skill to survive. The first warning came as a faint blip on the navigation system. The wolf ship reacted instantly. Panels shifted into defensive positions. Lights flickered in warning, and the hum of the core deepened to a low, resonant growl. The mechanic's heart raced. It was not an ordinary threat. It was precise, calculated, and approaching fast. The ship's instincts were alive, alerting him to danger before he could even see it. He realized the full scope of their situation. The prince's fleet was approaching, scanning for them, ready to strike. The mechanic had no weapons, no reinforcements, only the wolf ship and their bond. He had to trust it completely, and in return, it trusted him. The partnership they had built was now being tested in a way neither could ignore. As the first enemy ships appeared on the radar, the wolf ship shifted again, preparing for evasive maneuvers. Its hull adjusted, panels realigned, and the engine hummed with power that seemed almost alive. The mechanic guided the ship through a series of careful movements, each one coordinated with the ship's instincts. It was a dance between human intuition and the ship's semi-sentient intelligence. Together, they were a force neither could match alone. The fleet tried to surround them, but the wolf ship was faster, smarter, and unpredictable. It darted through asteroid fields, weaved between debris, and used gravity wells to its advantage. Every maneuver was precise, almost like a predator stalking its prey. The mechanic held tight, narrating his actions, speaking softly and letting the ship respond. The bond they had formed allowed them to anticipate each other's moves perfectly. One of the enemy ships fired a warning shot, a beam of energy streaking through space toward them. The wolf ship reacted instantly. Panels shifted, deflecting the blast, and the hull absorbed the impact with barely a tremor. The mechanic realized that the vessel had instincts similar to a wild animal, alert, reactive, and deadly when provoked. It was not attacking recklessly. It was defending with precision, ensuring their survival while avoiding unnecessary destruction. As the battle continued, the mechanic began to understand the true nature of the wolf ship. It was not just a ship. It was a living predator in space, aware of its surroundings, responsive to threats, and capable of adapting to challenges in real time. It was calculating, patient, and protective, an intelligent being that had survived countless dangers and now relied on him as much as he relied on it. The enemy fleet grew frustrated. No human or machine had ever outmaneuvered them like this. They tried different tactics, different formations, but the wolf ship anticipated every move. Its panels shifted defensively, its hull absorbed impacts, and its engines propelled them with precision and power. The mechanic realized that the bond they shared was their greatest weapon. Trust, coordination, and understanding allowed them to do the impossible. Hours passed in tense maneuvering. The mechanic never let go of the controls, constantly observing the ship, reading its signals, and communicating softly. The wolf ship responded with instinctive intelligence, adjusting to every move, every threat, every possibility. They were no longer just human and machine. They were partners, allies, and companions in the truest sense. Finally, the prince's forces, exhausted and unable to match the wolf ship's speed and adaptability, began to retreat. The mechanic breathed a sigh of relief, but he knew the battle was only one step in their journey. The wolf ship's instincts had protected them, and its intelligence had guided them, but the universe was vast, and dangers would come again. As they traveled through open space, the mechanic took time to observe the ship more closely. Its panels were aligned perfectly, its engine hum was steady, and the subtle vibrations of the hull felt almost like a living heartbeat. He realized that the wolf ship had fully awakened. It was no longer dormant or passive. It was aware, intelligent, and capable of independent action. And it had chosen him as its companion, its partner, and its caretaker. The mechanic reflected on their journey. He had started with a scrap ship, dismissed by everyone, bought from a careless prince. But he had seen potential, worked patiently, and built a bond that transcended ordinary understanding. The wolf ship had responded to care, respect, and patience, showing its true nature only to someone willing to understand it. Together, they had survived threats that would have destroyed ordinary humans and machines alike. As the stars stretched endlessly before them, the mechanic made a promise. He would protect the wolf ship, care for it, and continue to learn from it. He knew that the bond they shared was rare, extraordinary, and powerful. It was not just a ship. It was a companion, a legend, and a living being that had trusted him. With its life, days passed, and they continued their journey through uncharted systems. The mechanic learned more about the ship's intelligence, discovering hidden compartments, secret systems, and abilities he had never imagined. The wolf ship responded to him with trust, adjusting to his commands, assisting in repairs, and even guiding them towards safer routes. It was a partnership built on understanding, respect, and shared survival. Eventually, they found a quiet system far from the prince and his forces. The mechanic parked the ship on a barren, rocky planet, giving them both time to rest and reflect. The wolf ship's hum was soft, gentle, almost like a sigh of relief. The mechanic walked along the hull, feeling the subtle vibrations, and realized how extraordinary their journey had been. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and overwhelming odds, and they had survived together. The human mechanic smiled. He had discovered something remarkable, something alive, intelligent, and loyal. He had awakened the wolf ship from dormancy, forged a bond, and together They had overcome challenges that seemed impossible. The adventure had begun with curiosity and persistence, and it had grown into a story of trust, courage, and companionship that neither could have imagined. Looking out at the stars, the mechanic knew that their journey was far from over. The universe was vast, full of dangers and discoveries, but he was no longer alone. He had the Wolf ship, a living, intelligent partner that could think, react, and protect. Together, they would explore, learn, and survive. Their story had started with a simple purchase of scrap, but it had become a legend, a human and a wolf ship, bound by trust, courage, and an unbreakable bond. By the end of their journey in this chapter, the mechanic understood a truth that would guide him forever. Patience, care, and respect can awaken greatness, even in the most unexpected places. A bond forged in trust can overcome fear, danger, and impossibility. And sometimes, what the world sees as worthless can hold the power to change everything. The Wolf ship pulsed gently under his hands, the hum of its engine steady and strong. The human mechanic knew that together they were unstoppable. They had survived the prince's forces, learned to trust one another, and discovered a connection deeper than anything either had known. The stars stretched ahead, endless and inviting, and together they would face whatever the universe had in store. For the first time in a long while, the mechanic felt truly at peace. He had found a companion, a protector, and a legend. And together, they would carve their path through the galaxy, unstoppable, unbroken, and unafraid.